morning. So I wanted to start the day off today by scaring you a little bit, so I'm sorry. I hope everyone had coffee and bacon. As many of you may know, first and foremost, let me first say, with the live poll, it's the general session for today. So if you go into schedule, scroll down to the 8:30 general session, scroll down from there, and you'll see that we have a bunch of polling questions for you. I think we have 4. And while I'm about to do the next thing I'm going to do, I would love if you all could help me with this panel by participating in the panel and answering those questions for us. We're going to do this again at the end, and the whole point of this from the free speech perspective is that if we have a real conversation, then through that conversation we can get to better policy. So we're going to see how that goes.
Sorry to bother you, but most of the people at my table didn't have the Wi-Fi password,
Okay.
so they couldn't download the app.
So for those of you who don't have the Wi-Fi, I guess it's JWSTR. But if you have questions about how to download that, JWSTR19? Okay, so if you all could take that poll, or if you need help with that, we do have interns walking around, and also everyone on Alex's staff that's here can help you as well. So what I want to do now, before we get into our fireside chat, one of the issues that I work on with civil justice with Amy Anderson is the issue of donor disclosure and privacy. And we've spent a lot of time traveling to the states to try to warn you all of the importance and the dangers associated with donor disclosure. But I want to play from you some audio right now that is going to be very, very graphic. It has a lot of profane language, and I don't mean to be rude or disrespectful, but this is a real threat, and we wanted you to see it and hear it for what it actually is.
Hi, I see that you've donated the most allowable by federal law to Donald Trump. I think you're a scumbag, and I fucking despise everything you stand for. I plan on calling you and filling up your voicemail with a bunch of bullshit. So enjoy that. I will make sure to post this number and extension all over the internet. Fuck you very much. Fuck you for your racist bullshit. And fuck you for being scared of your fellow human being. I think you're a scumbag. It's pretty apparent that all you do is make money off other people's sales of their property because you have no fucking worth of your own. So why don't you go fuck yourself and have a terrible day. Goodbye.
So if you couldn't hear all of it, basically what we have happening here is a couple weeks ago, Joaquin Castro decided that he was going to post the actual names and employers of people who donated to Donald Trump. His intent to do this was not because he cared about transparency in elections or ethic laws. We all know he did this because his idea and his intent was to intimidate people to donate to the causes or the people whom they believe and choose to. This was intentional, and it was all because of transparency laws that allow people to obviously know who you donate to. But 20 years ago, people had to go into a building and look through microfiche. Today, you have politicians just putting this on the internet with the intent to harass their own constituents. And so a woman from his own district was harassed as a result of this tweet. We blocked the names out here, but the original tweet had everyone's actual name listed along with their employers. Steve Scalise, as you all know, who was obviously injured a few years ago as a result of violence like this, said that people should not be personally targeted for their political views, period. This isn't a game. It's dangerous and lives are at stake. I know this firsthand. You will be getting some books, our donor disclosure toolkit, that we're gonna send around because this is the threat that we've been warning people about, and unfortunately, it's starting to come true. So the end of the day, what we need to ask you all is, if this continues to happen, and all of you as public sector members here, do you feel that your constituents will be safe if they're able to donate to the causes that they want, but other people are able to publicly use that to harass them or harass their employer? So we just wanted you all to be aware of this, and if you have questions about donor disclosure, please come and talk with me. All right, so with that said, I'm gonna have my panel come on up. As they're coming up, I just wanted to read a quick statement. So Institute for Free Speech, I work with them on a lot of issues. They actually have an exhibit booth here as well. And this was just their quote. They work, and originally worked a lot on campaign finance laws, but through the course of all of this, this is what they're starting to see in these attacks. So again, when you guys go back to your state capitals and people are telling you to worry about transparency and ethics, What that usually means is they're looking for ways to harass and intimidate people that they don't like. So just make sure you're putting the First Amendment first, and we can find a million other ways to make sure government is transparent. Okay, so I'm gonna come take a seat with you guys. All right. So we're having this conversation today because, well, we all know that there's the perception out there that the internet is supposed to be open and free for all, but a lot of people believe that there is bias against certain conservatives or certain ideologies. So just a quick raise of your hand. How many of you, if you took the poll, how many of you felt that you've been censored on the internet because of your ideology? All right. So regardless of whether this is real or not, perception is reality. So at ALEC, we just want to have a conversation about that because as the world changes, maybe that means policies need to be reformed. So Justin, I want you to go first and just tell us why did you want to participate in this, and more importantly, about your poll and what the internet has done for you as a public sector member and how it's helped your constituents hold you accountable.
Thank you, and good morning. I consider myself a high utilizer of free speech. Formerly being in law enforcement, you got to have thick skin, and especially all of us in public office, we have to take a few bumps and bruises. But I don't run from speech, and we get it quite a bit. A lot of harassment, but that's part of the job. So in preparation for this, because I want to help not only our members, but Shelby, she works really hard on this issue. I put a poll out on my Facebook page, and I asked my followers, largely my constituents, and some people that don't like me too much, if social media has improved their communication with their elected official. And largely, it's obviously a yes, 72%. So to me, in public office, that's a mandate. 72% of us say, social media is here, this is how we're communicating with our elected officials today.
Do you think, as a conservative politician, have you experienced that type of bias, or do you get complaints from your constituents that they feel they get that bias?
My constituents do feel that they get some bias, but my response is, the free market works all of this out. If I feel like some of the information I put out there is biased or regulated by a private industry platform, then I'm going to change the way I communicate. I want people to see if there is bias. I want to be an open book.
All right. And Kim Coleman, so Representative Coleman is the public sector chair for the center, so she's been instrumental on multiple free speech issues. So we wanted her to speak on this as well because, again, you're also a public figure, you're a conservative, you think that there's some of this bias happening, but you're also a huge advocate for free speech. So share us your thoughts and what you think, if you agree with Justin or not, or a slightly different position.
So I agree with Justin that the social media platforms has really transformed how we're able to reach out to our constituents. It's on their time. It's when they can be present. It's not a fixed town hall where if it may conflict with other obligations. They can tap into social media, find me, I can find them 24/7. So that is such an opportunity for us. Whether there is bias, I don't know because I can't see it. I know that I think I'm putting my message out there, and I think that that is getting distributed in a fair and equal way that my constituents can access that. We're really learning from other people that the bias has limited the reach of my message, which is I can't see that. I put a message out. I don't know what Facebook does with that after that. I see who interacts. I don't see who didn't see it and who is not interacting. And the role of the social media platforms in limiting my reach. How do we see that? I mean, we are just learning the extent to which that has been orchestrated and it has been deliberate.
All very, very good points. And last but not least, of course, Robby, if you could share with us a little bit more about you. Robby has been also instrumental influencer in the free speech world. He's worked very much on any of the Title IX issues that I know we've talked about here as well, with sexual harassment, the issues with due process on campus. And he's also been, recently just wrote a book about free speech and what's happening on college campuses. So we wanted to get a private citizen's perspective, but also someone who obviously relies on media in order to get his own message out. So Robby.
Sure. It's been fascinating to watch some of the cultural themes that I cover on college campuses, the censorship, the canceling, the shutting down of speakers who hold views that some number of the students find offensive, their tactics of not wanting to confront or have difficult conversations. That's what I write about. That's what my book is about. And it's been interesting to watch that over the last few years, I think, make its way somewhat into the broader culture, into the online culture. There's, I think, a tendency to report or to build sort of mobs against people, particularly on Twitter, which is a platform that easily allows for that, to get people sort of out of the public square if they hold a view that offends someone, often if it offends someone on the left. So that's definitely something that came out of the campus and is affecting our broader culture and is going to be an issue for private organizations, I think, as they hire young people. Not all young people are like this, obviously, but a few young people who have that kind of progressive campus mindset that the workplace must be a safe space or something. And so if you say something that I disagree with, it's not just we can't have a disagreement, it's compromising my safety, so you can't be allowed to do that. So the weaponizing of harassment law for an anti-free speech purpose is something I'm very concerned about. And just briefly about the tech stuff, obviously I think there is some bias against right-of-center perspectives. I think much of it is unintentional, frankly. It's a side effect of maybe more people on the left reporting things they don't like, and then the platform takes action after it's reported. I don't think they're proactively going through and censoring conservative speech. And I'm also very wary of sort of solving this problem by giving the government any license to regulate these companies, because we know that's such a slippery slope.
Well, that's an excellent point. So I do think that is part of the culture, right? People on the right tend to brush things off. We're not going to just go and run and get somebody else in trouble or try to attack them and go after their job. It happens. We've been known to be crazy too. But I do think you're right. A lot of this is culturally driven because we're teaching a whole generation of people to snitch. On college campuses, they have bias response teams. So the idea that this has now moved to media and to social media, now we have bias response teams on social media, I think is more a reflection of the culture, not as much maybe the platforms. So the first question, this is what we expected, right? Most legislators are using the internet in a good, positive way to connect with their constituents, and this makes perfect sense. So this has been good for democracy. If we could put up the second poll question. Let's see. So the second poll question is, the internet has revolutionized how we communicate, do business, and research. The internet has added trillions of dollars to the economy and lowered barriers for people to express their ideas. In your opinion, what is the best way to describe the internet today? The top answer was a tool of opportunity. Second answer was the new town square. So I want to break down a little bit why we chose what we chose for our answers. From the free speech perspective, when I poll and talk with people about this, most people, either constituents or public sector members, are using social media and the internet to actually participate in their democracy. Whether that's doing a hashtag social drive for ALS, or using it, unfortunately, to target people to donating to things that they don't like, people are using the internet to interact. So a lot of people may think that although these companies are private, these platforms are private, we as Americans have said, no, this is our new virtual town square. But it looks like most of you here see it as a tool of opportunity, and it looks like an opportunity to engage. So I want to go back to our public sector members here. What have you seen the internet do just in your states? Are you seeing good things happen? Are you seeing people get more divisive as a result?
Well,
what have you seen?
I think it amplifies people's reactions or actions, right? Because if you, let's just say, for instance, if somebody goes into the town square and says, I disagree with our president or whatever, whoever's in the town square is going to hear it, right? But if we put it on Facebook or Twitter, it's amplified, extensively, even to the point where sometimes the harassment end of it, the others stifle others' free speech. So, I shared this live feed on my Facebook this morning, and I can assure you I'm getting comments right now about what I'm saying here, but I love it, and I'm going to have detractors on my Facebook page, and you know what? It empowers my constituents. My constituents love the fact that I am an open book. I will say it how it is. You know, and that is my opportunity. That's my tool. And even though they may feel obligated, or they may feel a little harassed to the point where they won't comment, they appreciate that I do.
I like that. Okay, what about you, Kim?
So I think the opportunity to have the town square, I mean, it's kind of both, but I think the opportunity that we have is to be able to put our own truth out there and not have it sort of repackaged and have the media tell the story about us. We can go directly to the media, to our people. We can go directly to the public and speak our truth. And I think that's a big opportunity for us. And I think we've seen more of that as we've lost a little bit of trust in the press, that there's another way for people to get information from their public officials.
I think that's excuse me, I think that's a fabulous point. So like you said, if you're being labeled a certain way because you're Alec or you're a legislator, to be able to cut through that and just be legislative Kim Coleman and talk to your constituents, that lets them see you and not the labels that other people have put on you.
Exactly.
So that's a great point. Robby, how have you seen it just in your field? Are you guys using social media more to just find out what people think or to write about? How has it impacted your career?
You know, it's interesting. So I'm a journalist. I write for a magazine, a libertarian magazine, Reason. But I have so many friends who are journalists who absolutely hate social media with a probably passion that burns even brighter than like your most outraged conservative person who feels they've been totally censored on Facebook or something. The journalists hate it that much because Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, are a competitor and have usurped some of the traditional gatekeeping role that the traditional press has played, and they hate that. And so there's a lot of accusations coming from people more on the left or left media that like they think, for instance, YouTube is radicalizing young people toward the right or toward the far right because of the way YouTube recommends videos to you one after the other. I'm kind of skeptical of that, and certainly skeptical that any government intervention should be done to handle that. But so those arguments are on the left as well, which is another reason for the right to be wary of going down that road.
That's a very, very good point. If we could put up the next poll question. Okay, do you think social media platforms are biased against conservatives and are acting on that bias by removing conservative content? Jonathan Hanschild, who runs our task force with Justin here, is probably a little, oh my gosh, no, tech. So yes, 82% of you believe that this is happening. So as we like to say, and Jonathan and I say all the time, the perception is the reality. So as much as the tech companies may not be doing this, it doesn't really matter what's happening, it's matter what people think is happening, right? As all of you know very full well. So let's dive into this. Is it happening, Justin? And do you hear constituents asking you to do something about it? And if so, what do you want to do about it?
So I did put something similar on my Facebook page, and largely my constituents feel that, yes, conservative content is dialed down. Me being a free market, almost libertarian, I believe that it's a good thing because we want, like you said, if this is a reality, or if people believe this is happening, it is going to innovate others to create a different platform.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point, yeah.
So it's okay for people to feel this way. If we do get involved, if we regulate private companies, you lose that innovation.
So what do you think, hearing calls from other conservatives or other limited government conservatives that now think maybe it's time to rethink our philosophy on this particular topic because it's the internet, it's this new thing? Does that concern you, or do you think that pressure will back down?
I'm not concerned, honestly. I think we are going to move on past this. I think you're going to see other platforms. I think it's good that everyone can air their laundry out. If they feel they're being biased or dialed down, right, then they're going to go to other platforms. They're going to yell louder in the town square.
I like that. And Kim, what do you think? What are your constituents saying about this? Do they want you as a legislator to do something about it? And do you think the government should?
So again, going back to whether the bias exists, again, I put my message out. I haven't been personally censored. I haven't had anything removed. I have had constituents express that they've been shut down. They've said the wrong thing. they're in Facebook jail for 28, 48 hours. So we know some of that's happened to somebody out there, clearly.
Has anyone been in Facebook jail? I think it's a badge of honor now. I have. I've been in Facebook jail.
I haven't been in Facebook jail. Yeah, but no, I haven't heard a call to do something. I think just the awareness is what people want out there. People hope other people understand that there are limitations to our conservative voice out in social media. So I'm not hearing calls to do something, but just know.
I like that, okay. And Robby, what about you? Do people talk about this within media? You just said journalists don't really like this. I would imagine they'd like to use this to try to get their piece of the pie back.
No, I mean, you hear about it a lot, and certainly this has happened to some people. You know, rules are enforced against people arbitrarily all the time, whether they're official government rules or just private rules in our own going about things. So it happens, but like a platform like YouTube is in such a difficult place. They have, I think, thousands of new hours of video appearing on YouTube every minute. So there is no way, it's literally impossible for them to review all this content beforehand. They simply can't do it. If you required them to do it, they would have to shut down, or they'd have to limit the amount of video they had appearing on the platform every few minutes. So they're not going to be able to regulate this stuff. But then people complain. Well, they say I don't like this, and then they look and go, okay, well maybe this does violate our rules. I think it'd be great if the platforms come up with clearer rules always for what kind of thing is allowable. So then if you do get banned or temporarily or censored or something, and you can see, well, this violates this rule very clearly, and then I think that's okay. I would also just say that we talk about big tech as a monopoly and as so powerful, and how could it ever be grappled with? But the market is a place of creative destruction. There have been companies always where you couldn't imagine them ever having go away. They have more and more power over society, and then they're gone the next day. Tumblr was a hugely important blog website in the 2000s. It sold for like $1 billion just a few years ago. And today it is worth nothing, is worth zero. They're just going to take a loss on it. So it can switch that fast in tech space. So certainly we should not say, oh, there's no hope. These big platforms will always be the same way they are, and they'll be censoring conservatives and so on. I just really don't think that's true.
I have to say, my 7-year-old niece has told me that only old people use Facebook. So apparently I'm not cool anymore. So okay, so we can go to the next question. If you think social media platforms are removing conservative content, what do you think should be done? Government oversight or regulation, 14%. Luckily, we're excited to see here that 69% are saying that we should allow the marketplace to solve the problem. But let's dive into that, because some of the feedback that I get is, yes, I believe in the philosophy of letting the market solve the problem, but the harm is real right now. What do we do right now? Could we really actually break these companies up? Justin, what do you think about that? Do you think this is going to happen quickly, or is this an issue that is a real issue now?
Well, to be honest, I'd be lying if I didn't think at one point when I posted something and it was delayed and delayed and delayed because somebody internally on that platform had to make sure my comment was okay, right? So whenever you do feel like you're censored, you get frustrated. And the first thing you want to do is say, especially in government, you say, we need to fix this. Right? But then if you allow yourself to cool off the next day, then you realize that, okay, the market can fix this. So not overreacting is the best thing that we can do to allow things to work it out.
Not overreacting, okay. Kim, does the polling at all, I guess, surprise you? Are you glad to see this?
I would expect that here at ALEC, and because government usually does such a good role in fixing problems. So that's where I always go first. Not really. So.
Oh, it just went up to 71%, so okay.
Okay, there's like 20-something% of you out there who don't realize that yet. I think there are interesting oversight conversations that we are having in Congress right now to be transparent about what happens in these companies. And again, whether there's a role for Congress to intervene or our state legislatures to intervene or not is a different question. But again, having an understanding, asking the questions, is there bias on these platforms? are people being treated disparately? I think more than that is when I put my money down to advertise and to share my content, is it being equitably shared? Is my dollar buying the same influence and reach as a liberal dollar? And so I think those are valuable conversations to have in the oversight role. The regulatory role is a much different place that I would be very cautious too. Sometimes we're hearing the question, there was in some of the congressional hearings, a discussion about whether this is a monopolized system. And we do have, we do recognize a role, limited role for government in mitigating the effects of monopolies. Are we at that point? I mean, I think to Robby's point, the tech industry really can turn on a dime, and the hope and expectation that it will. But I think for the people that might be thinking, is there a role for oversight or for regulation, is it with the view that maybe there's a monopoly that maybe can't be cracked? But I think the holding back, not overreacting, not reacting too quickly, seeing if the markets really do correct, or that's probably not the right phrase, but will the market intervene and provide something different if this is not doing what we would like it to do as consumers of those platforms? But I think there is a little bit of that question. Is it more like a monopoly?
And Shelby, before Robby, we go to Robby, you know who has government oversight is China.
Oh, yeah. We should have Carla up here. So Robby, specifically, I would like to ask you more about the oversight by private third-party groups and the idea of regulation for two reasons. One, when you see these hearings on Capitol Hill in DC, do you think that the members there really truly understand how tech works? I think a lot of people in tech just kind of shook their heads listening to the questions that government officials were asking, right? I think a lot of young people were like, no, that's not how you say that. But also, what do you think the role and the responsibility would be, obviously as a journalist, but kind of equating journalism now to these online platforms? Do they have an ethical duty, a standard, kind of like lawyers or something else?
I mean, it's so funny watching these hearings, and you have the senator like, where is the data on the phone? Is it in the phone? And like, how could you people ever assert the authority to regulate these companies knowing absolutely nothing about the intricacies of like where the data is stored and who owns it and what it even is?
Or running a lemonade stand.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't trust them to do even the simpler task of that. So I think that right, and you know, that was on both sides. That was Democrats and Republicans, and some understood it better than others, obviously. But so I think that should raise questions about their competency to regulate these things. But also, you heard people like Mark Zuckerberg say over and over again, like, yes, please regulate us. We want regulation. Regulation would be great. We're going to work with you. What does that tell me? It tells me when a big company is eager to be regulated, they see probably an advantage to having broad regulations of tech because that can also squelch competitors. That can be good. That can be rewarding for the bigger company. So that's another reason to be fearful. And I would also say that, you know, and so if we were to, you know, regulate them and say they have to be the town square, these platforms really can't do any sort of policing of speech, I mean, you would have some really negative unintended consequences because there is some kind of speech that I think it's good that the platform, for instance, all the platforms have rules against doxing, which is posting personal information about someone like where they live or where their phone number is. Not exactly the kind of thing but Castro did, but along those lines, that I think absolutely, yes, that should not be allowed on the platforms. That's dangerous. That invites people to harass or to have like Antifa mobs show up at people's houses. You don't want that kind of thing at all. That would be allowed in the public square. It's not allowed on the platforms, and I think that's a good difference that is allowed by these being private entities that can choose self-regulation rather than whatever broad sort of thing is forced upon them.
So at the same time, though, our attorneys in the Utah legislature have advised us to treat our Facebook pages as public forum, that we can't unfriend people, we can't block them, And so there's kind of a mixed message there, really.
No,
Well, and there's
that's
the
a good
lawsuit
point.
against Donald Trump for having blocked people on Twitter, and it's a dicey legal question. I think actually, I'm not sure. I would probably lead to the side that you should be allowed to.
Yeah, and
block
you're
whoever
right,
you want,
and,
but that's not a settled question.
Maryland did the same thing. They had to, with the governor, they had to enter into, actually submit a new social media, rule of how their office was going to work, because that was the argument. You're a public official, you're using this platform. So you're right, there does seem to be this, we'll make it public when it's convenient, and we'll
Yeah.
say we're private when it's convenient. I think that's something we do have to acknowledge. What do you all think is the responsibility of the tech companies themselves? So one of the theories I've had people in the free speech world say is, well, maybe they need to have free speech principles applied instead of, not a law, not make them a public utility, not make them responsible under the First Amendment, but they should have some type of free speech principle to their platforms. Justin, what do you think?
Well, I think that's going to be, the public wants to know what they're getting by being a member of that platform. And if their terms say that, we're not a political organization, we're going to allow everything as long as, obviously it's not inciting violence or terrorism and stuff like that. But, Facebook does, I think they do it well in the fact that if somebody posts an ugly comment on my page using a curse word or whatever, they will tell me that a comment was posted, but they won't make it public. Now, I have the option to allow people to see it by clicking on it and say, unhide it, which I always do, because it always works out in our favor. I want to see the ugliness. I want people to see the ugliness. It's important, because if they're not censored, then we all have the freedom to choose who our public officials are, right?
It's true, and as the free speech person, we should always be able to criticize our politicians,
Right.
Kim, do you think that there should be some type of free speech principle, guiding principle to these companies?
So I think that would be the choice in that private sector of choosing their brand, their standards. That's the essence of their own free speech as a company. So frequently companies choose to have community standards, frequently choose aspirational goals and standards, and so that would be their choice under their own free speech.
But not something we should be
Free expression.
mandating they do. Robbie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a culture of free speech is good. I think these are good norms to have that I would encourage the companies to adopt. I think generally they'll be better off if they're a little less proactive on the banning. And I've written articles criticizing the various platforms when they have taken action against, even really despicable speakers like Alex Jones and so on, because I think in general it will always look hypocritical because you ban this person, but then you could always find 10 examples of someone just as bad on the other side who were not banned. So I think they'd be better off. I think it's in their best interest. Free speech is a good thing. It makes our society better off. I'm critical of sometimes of private universities when there's censorship going on there, even though technically they don't have to follow the First Amendment unless they say that they follow it in their sort of policies that the students agree to or something like that. So it's free speech is more than just a legal standard. It's a cultural thing. It's a weird thing that has never existed before in human history until like the Enlightenment happened, and most groups of people like killed each other over having you offended my family and we're going to go out and murder you now, or the king's going to execute you, or you're going to be burned at the stake, and we don't do that anymore, and it's great. So it's a culture to celebrate, certainly.
I like that positive spin, right? Yeah, we're not burning people at the stake anymore, so we're doing great. If we could go to the next poll question, I think we have one more. I lost count. Oh, we're done? Okay, that's what I thought. So what we're trying to figure out right now then in terms of the policy side here and in the free speech world and the tech world is how do we balance this obvious new thing where everyone has decided to use this to participate in the process? And that's great. But we also are facing this also idea that these are private entities now kind of regulating how we're interacting with free speech. Do you see that dichotomy as something to be concerned with down the road? If private entities are now the platform of which we're using to express ourselves? Does
No,
that change the conversation?
No, not at all for me. I want to see, and I've said this before, innovation. I want to see other platforms show up. You know, I was commenting last night about a small platform that was kind of a response for conservatives. It was called Codius, I think, or something like that. And you know, it's tiny. And it was developed because some conservatives feel like they just don't have a voice on other platforms. Now, it's not taken off, I don't think, and no offense to the company that owns it, but you know, when that doesn't work, another one will come, and another one, and another one. And if we interfere, then we will lose that growth.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we do have to hold on to the fact that, as you were saying, Robby, I don't even remember half of the internet companies that were around when I was in middle school.
Yeah.
Most of the internet platforms aren't around. Someone told me
MySpace.
the other day. Yeah, someone told me that you can still technically get into MySpace, but most of it doesn't work. So I have no idea what's posted there. So, well, for the most part, Kim, did you want to add anything more?
So I wonder how many of you have TikTok? Everybody's using TikTok, right? Oh, one. So like that came out yesterday, and if you aren't there, because so my high school and college age kids are so embarrassed that I don't know what TikTok is, and really like came out yesterday. So I think, yeah, that's it. We look for multiple ways. We look for, you know, trying out different platforms. I still can't
Do you have TikTok?
What is that?
I know what it is.
A 15
Oh,
second.
Robby knows what it is.
If you have TikTok, you're going to win some votes.
So yeah, I've got TikTok. I just don't really get it yet. But you know, I'm still trying to figure. You know, somebody help. I mean, my kids help me with my Instagram. But so there are new opportunities all the time that we can just find those different ways to find our people and have them find us. And even if it's a fad and it goes away, there's the next thing around the corner. TikTok.
So for some of you, TikTok is you post a 15-second video of you dancing and lip syncing. So if a politician uses that in their campaign, I think it's going to be pretty successful.
Can we do that after?
Oh, you guys, we can take this right now.
Just a panel TikTok.
I mean, you already have this live feed, so I just think
Right.
you just need to
Wow.
you need to go right for it. Okay, so we actually we got 13 more minutes. Jonathan, do we have any questions that we wanted to ask? If you, my phone's dead. I'm sorry, but let me ask. I'll just pull this off the top of my head. What would you tell the tech companies if you could meet with them and talk with them? And what would you like to say to them?
I would say, you know, be out in the open. You know, if you do have a 40-page terms of service where somewhere it has your policy on how you treat speech on your platform, simplify it. Tell us how you treat speech.
Now, with that said, some of the push that we've started to see in some of the states are consumer protection laws around this. Obviously, the basic contract, right? This is what we said we were going to do. We took this down because you didn't follow this, so now we're taking it off. Do you all see that as a route for people who feel that they may have been damaged or censored? What do you think about those consumer bills that you start to see?
I'm weary of some. There's been some talk in conservative circles, particularly with Senator Josh Hawley, who's proposed like treating this like there's such a thing as social media addiction, and it's like a public health issue, which I think is very alarming. I mean, the public health issue is the sort of like liberal way into regulating every issue. There's been reflexive sort of panic about new technology, like, oh no, kids are video games, comic books, et cetera, it's TV, et cetera. It's always been fear that this is, it will ruin the next generation, or these are dangerous, or encouraging illness or something, that always ends up being, for the most part, unfounded. So it is also not a good reason to freak out, I think.
Okay, and what do you all think about the role of our online platforms, though, when it comes to elections? At the end of the day, we do have an election coming up. Everybody that I know, again, we're using social media to talk about these things, which is great. But do you think they have these reports that you hear, the things that we've heard, even the president allude to, that these platforms are helping to guide or persuade one way or the other? Does that concern you? Justin?
Well, if it's occurring, that does concern me. I'm going to need a lot of evidence before I condemn somebody, but it's something to consider. And if it is a concern, we're going to talk about it, and just by talking about it is going to probably help all of us in dealing with it, right?
And Kim, what about you? Do you get concerned as we move into elections that the platforms could be more biased intentionally, or do you think that's not really happening? But I know, last election, you had the issues with fake news and people blaming Facebook and Twitter for people voting because they read an article that they didn't fact check. Does that concern you?
I think what concerns me maybe most is just the transparency and knowing what if there's a platform that does have the bias, be more open about it. But I think we're hearing that exists, whether that's just kind of baked in the algorithms or whether that's intentional at some administrative level. I think we're still asking some of those questions.
Yeah.
But I think just knowing where you're living, what that space really is about, and then making the choices of how I want to exist in those spaces.
Good point. Okay. And Robby, what do you think as we move into the election? Does this concern you?
It's something to be aware of, certainly where campaign finance law dictates that some of these things are illegal or troubling. But from what I've seen of the studies on the extent of the influence of these things, the influence was very slight. Like the absolute fake news, like misleading stories, were seen by very 0.001% of people on platforms. Very few people shared them. Specifically, the Russian sort of ads were seen by almost no one. I think the idea that it had any sort of discernible impact is very unlikely. So of course it's something to be wary of. I'm wary of, I'm a big privacy guy. I'm concerned about what information they're gathering about people. Obviously, you're consenting to use these platforms, and in that, so it's an agreement that they're going to collect certain information about you, and ultimately, in order to sell you things you might like. So it's not a nefarious thing on its surface, but they should be transparent about that. They should be actually, what they tell you they're collecting should be what they're actually collecting, and they should be transparent about their policies for what that is and what you can say. I hate the broad language. When I start to look at what actually is their speech policy, it says, offensive conduct if it meets some threshold. I'm like, this could be anything. This could be any video could on YouTube, for instance, could bother someone, or post on Facebook. So I think I would ask them if I was in a conversation with Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, say, please, look at that stuff and be very crystal clear about what you're doing.
To his earlier point, I think we forget that sometimes our platforms that we're using, we're an echo chamber, right? The friends that I have on my platform that I use, I know how they feel, right? I look at this all the time, and yeah, I'm pretty well liked. I'm gonna get reelected, but we don't understand that there are exponentially more people that just don't have that immediate access and aren't sharing constantly what we're posting. So I think a lot of times we kind of overthink it.
That's a good point. So I want to go on one more topic real quick, because it's something both Jonathan and I work on in the context of online platforms and bullying. So Robby, I want to start with you. How do you handle online bullying yourself, and do you think this is a problem that tech companies should address, or is this something that's more suitable for legislation?
So this is interesting. So I testified before Congress a few weeks ago on the subject of the rise of sort of white nationalism and how the social media was playing a role in that. And I was, pushing back on some of the kind of more extreme ideas that hate crimes are higher than they've ever been before, which I don't really think is supported by the evidence. But certainly it's true that the social media allows like-minded people to find each other. So you could have and this could be true of sort of white nationalist people, also like Antifa type people, the crazy radical fringe who actually is engaged in violence and is engaged in horrible harassment online. They've been able to find each other because now you would have thought you were alone in the world, that you were the only person with these crazy, insane ideas. And now you've found, the handful of other people that share those ideas. You've been able to segregate into a circle of those people and have, those kinds of discussions online and promote those really bad things, and also engage in targeted abuse of people. So that's something that the platform should take seriously, and they do take somewhat seriously. That's something they're all cognizant of. Again, they all have policies against doxing, like I said earlier. So that's, but that's not, again, I don't think that's something for government to be aware of, because a lot of harassment, bullying is nasty, is terrible, but is protected speech, would be considered protected speech under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has taken such a broad, I think to their credit, broad view of what counts as free speech. There's no such thing as hate speech, right? To the surprise of many college students, the Supreme Court has never said this is a category of speech called hate speech that is not protected. There's no such thing that exists. They've said that, shouting horrible, vile things, the Westboro Baptist Church at military servicemen's funerals, they've said that's protected speech. So that's protected speech. Any of your sort of harassment, bullying would also be. So it's again, something only that the platforms could address themselves. If it came down to a court case, I think it's very clear what the outcome would be.
Now, Tim and Justin, I would love to hear your perspectives. I would assume you guys probably get calls from constituents, maybe parents saying, this is happening to my kid. Do something with the online bullying.
So a little bit to Robby's point, you cannot threaten, intimidate, and harass. Harassment is not protected speech. The problem is we call everything offensive harassing. And this is something that I'm just going to throw in my campus stuff a little bit here. Look at your laws in your state and your policies that define harassment, and make sure that it comports with Supreme Court law on this. It's already not protected. Regardless of the platform, you cannot go anywhere and threaten, intimidate, and legally harass a person. So short of that, our speech is absolutely free. Understand, though, that those things are not protected. Threats, intimidation, harassment. And when that's happening, it's actionable, usually.
Yeah, and I don't want to censor bullies. I want to know who they are. I mean, we in public office, sometimes we get threats. If we censor the simplest bully, you don't see that progression that often occurs when somebody does something bad.
Mm-hmm. You make a great point. When I speak to college students, and a couple years ago when they were really, really upset with some of the racial issues, I would say, look, but if this is happening, don't silence it, because next year people can't turn around and say it's not happening because you've got all these people running their mouths and saying this. So I think you make a good point there. So I want to give you guys some final thoughts, but it seems like what we've learned here, which is great to see, is that we do want the marketplace to solve this problem, but we all think that there is a problem. At least the perception is we think there is a problem. But it's good to see that it seems, at least in this room, we're still holding out hope for the philosophy of limited government and free markets, and hope that it will still work in the 21st century with the internet, right? Justin, what do you want everyone to know for your final thoughts?
I just wanted to say, I don't know if we gave people the chance to change their votes in this survey
So if
or
we
not,
could,
but 1% say political sensitivity training, and I wonder if that person wants to change their vote.
I love those classes. They're so much fun. I've got to teach a couple of them. They're a blast. I recommend doing it for side catch. It's great. Kim?
Just closing ideas, just understand the platforms, understand that world that's out there. Find other ways. If you don't feel like you your reach is working on a platform, find another platform.
Absolutely. And Robby?
Sure. I would urge you all to check out my book on this subject, Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump, where I interview a lot of the students who are engaged in the kind of shutdowns and censorships of speakers. Interestingly, often it's not just of conservatives. I've talked to professors who are very, very far to the left, but they think something that is somehow at odds with what the new progressive student movement thinks, and they tell me they're afraid to teach their classes and talk about uncomfortable subjects from the left, because they're going to be investigated. The students are going to file complaints. They're going to be investigated, and there's this climate of absolute chilling, even among the left, out of fear of, again, not all students, not all young people by any stretch of the imagination, a small activist fringe that has tremendously gained power on campuses, and I worry wants to exert that same influence elsewhere in reality.
If you all want to learn more, Robby's going to stay and be signing and giving away copies of his book. So that will start probably about 10, 15 minutes after here, but I definitely encourage all of you. I've worked with so many of you, particularly on campus speech issues, but free speech generally. It is probably our most popular topic, so it's a lot of fun. But please make sure that you reach out to Robby and just ask him what is actually happening in college campuses. I do think sometimes the media hypes these things up sometimes, and we get focused on one little microcosm. So other than that, thank you all so much, and hopefully the internet will fix itself.
Thanks, Shelby.